Things are moving so fast. Feels out of our grasp.
The world as we know today is on the brink of a seismic shift. And I'm not sure we're ready for it.
And how are we expected to move on with our lives when an injustice of this scale is happening right beside us?
The cries of their children should be heard as our own.
Right now, you have more access to information than I ever had at your age. That makes life a lot easier, but also so much more difficult.
This is the result of worrying about profit and progress without establishing the mental health infrastructure to support it.
We're in a battle against unemployment, and we're losing.
It's our right to live in peace, to find happiness, to exist.
And we've been told, okay, that we can help by reducing our individual carbon footprint, as if that would make a dent in what these massive industries release into the atmosphere on a daily basis.
But these are practices that can start small.
We don't have time. We don't have time to afford minimal progress.
At some point, we have to accept our planet simply cannot handle all of us. All of this.
If we can't agree on the most basic principles of human dignity, the cycle will continue to perpetuate itself.
The question is, which ideas, leaders, and technologies will be the stewards of our many shared futures?
Artificial intelligence will prove itself to be either humanity's greatest ally or its demise.
At some point along the way, we decided we were different. You belong to a country. You are part of a religion.
Life has changed. Dive into it. Move for that. We can continue to argue details from the safety of our homes. Or we can say stop. Enough.
How are we going to thrive in this world? If we want to achieve long-lasting, sustainable peace, as nations, as people, we need to keep talking, trying to understand each other with empathy and respect. Life is an endless conversation.
Heads of state, heads of government, ministers, excellencies, distinguished guests, and dear friends, a very warm welcome to the Doha Forum. I'm Rita Fakhri, and I'm honored to be back here as we meet once again to discuss some of the most pressing issues and defining moments of our time. We meet at a pivotal time in our history, when our shared humanity is being tested, once again, in the cruelest way possible, when our collective inability or unwillingness to act to help children, the most defenseless and vulnerable amongst us, has cast a long and dark shadow on our professed law-based order and system and our long-established norms and values. What we're all witnessing today, day after day, in Palestine, is testing, maybe even shattering, many of our most fundamental beliefs in humanity. It has put into question our commitment to the principles enshrined in the preamble to the United Nations to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war. As we convene once again to rethink, to reimagine the world not as it is, but as it should be. We stand at a crossroads, facing stark choices that have marked history since time immemorial, war and peace, or rather war or peace. What lessons have we learned from the mistakes of the past? How do we save the children of Gaza? How do we save the children of every war? How do we live with our inaction, our silence? Are we an unwilling accomplice to what many legal experts have said bears all the hallmarks of a genocide? If the last few weeks have taught us anything, it is that the glaring inequalities of our global system are even deeper than we once thought possible. What kind of future do we want to build? Can we continue to bring justice to some and not to others? Can we implement international law only when it serves our interests? Or is international law the exclusive preserve of the powerful few? Judge and jury. We're here today to rethink and reimagine the fundamental tenets of our global system, to disrupt the trappings and break the shackles of the power structures of the past, to move together towards a more equitable world that recognizes and indeed celebrates our cultural diversity, to build systems, norms, and institutions that reflect the world as it should be today, not as it once was. The theme of this year's forum is Building Shared Futures, Bina Mustaqbal Mushtarak. It reflects the momentousness of the time that we live in, as the forces of fragmentation around the world seek to drive us even further apart. But we also bear witness to the extraordinary force of people, ordinary people who bring us together, who force us to recover our humanity before it is all gone. When we last met here in 2022, it was before Israel's onslaught on Gaza following the bloody events of October 7th, which the Secretary General of the United Nations reminded us did not happen in a vacuum. It was before some 20,000 people, 20,000 lives were extinguished. It was before 8,000 children stopped breathing, stopped dreaming, many of them still under the rubble. Before at least 18,000 tons of bombs were dropped on a besieged refugee camp called Gaza. That's about 1.5 times the yield of the bomb dropped on Hiroshima. Can we sit back and allow this to happen in 2023? Can we simply look away? At the start of every Doha Forum, I always promise to keep my skepticism in check. But as a journalist, I have to say it's always difficult to do, particularly when 63 of my fellow colleagues, journalists, were killed in just the last 2 months. Many of them targeted because, well, to kill a journalist, to kill a cameraman or a photographer, is to kill a story, an image, and in some cases, a massacre. As we begin the 21st edition of the Doha Forum, let's ask ourselves once again, do we want more of the same? Empty speeches, broken promises. We can continue to argue details from the safety of our homes, or we can say, stop, enough. You just heard this cry for Palestine, from Palestine. But it's a cry for the entire world. We've all heard it before, not just in Gaza, but in so many cities and villages across the world, particularly in the global south, where people yearn for equality, for dignity, for all, and justice. Can we create the change we so desperately need if we remain silent, if we simply wait for change to happen? Let us make this a transformative moment, a transformative forum, a moment for action, for disruption, and for constructive engagement. Let us move beyond the status quo. Many of the leading think tanks and institutions in the world are gathered here today. They have partnered with the Doha Forum to make this a global platform for inclusive, for genuine dialogue, a dialogue that reflects the interests, the human rights, the aspirations of all nations and people, not just the powerful few, but those who often feel unheard and left behind. The Forum is proud to have the continued support of its sponsor, the Qatar Investment Authority. And now to open the 21st Doha Forum, it is my privilege to invite to the stage His Excellency Sheikh Mohammed bin Abdulrahman bin Jassim Al Thani, Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign Affairs of the State of Qatar.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. صاحب السمو الشيخ تميم بن حمد آل ثاني أمير دولة قطر حفظه الله، أصحاب الفخامة والمعالي والسعادة، السيدات والسادة، السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. أرحب بكم جميعا في قطر في النسخة 21 من منتدى الدوحة. هذا المنتدى الذي أردناه منصة للتواصل بين الشعوب، ليس حين يكون هذا التواصل سهلا فحسب، بل حتى في أحلك الأوقات وفي ظل تصاعد الاستقطاب في العالم، حين يكون التواصل بيننا حاجة لا غنى عنها. حين اخترنا شعار منتدى الدوحة هذا العام معا نحو مستقبل مشترك، كنا نأمل أن ينعقد المنتدى في ظروف تسمح لنا أن نتحاور بإيجابية حول مستقبلنا المشترك بما يترجم طموحات وأحلام شعوب العالم، ولكن وبكثير من الحزن والألم نلتقي اليوم والعالم يعاني تحت ظل أزمات متلاحقة لا هوادة فيها. إن ما يحدث في غزة من كارثة إنسانية غير مسبوقة يدفع الشعوب الحرة حول العالم إلى توجيه أسئلة مشروعة حول ماهية النظام الدولي وفاعلية أدواته القانونية وصدق مبادئه، وهذه الأسئلة تزداد إلحاحاً مع تزايد المشاهد المؤلمة التي ربما نشيح بوجوهنا عنها من فظاعتها، ولكنها واقع يعيشه 2,300,000 إنسان كل يوم منذ أكثر من 60 يوماً. ومن المؤسف أن تكون الذرائع التي تساق حول استهداف المدنيين مقبولة لدى البعض. إن استهداف المدنيين من النساء والأطفال والأبرياء أياً كانت خلفياتهم العرقية أو الدينية أو الثقافية بشكل متعمد مرفوض تحت أي ذريعة، فالقانون الدولي وقيمنا الإنسانية والدينية تفرض حمايتهم، وإدانتنا قتلهم وحصارهم وتجويعهم موقف مبدئي ثابت لا يتزعزع. أظهرت هذه الأزمة بوضوح حجم الفجوة بين الشرق والغرب وبين الأجيال المتعاقبة وازدواجية المعايير في المجتمع الدولي، حيث انقسم العالم إلى مطالب بإنهاء هذه الحرب وإيقاف آلة القتل، ومتردد حتى في مجرد الدعوة إلى وقف إطلاق النار. ونرى من كان يطالب بوقفة عالمية ضد الاحتلال في سياق آخر يرفض اليوم مجرد إدانة جرائم احتلال الأراضي الفلسطينية ويقف عائقاً أمام التوافق الدولي على إيقافها. ولا بد لنا من وقفة أمام من يريد أن يعيد صياغة الصراع على شكل حرب دينية. هذا الصراع كان ولا زال قضية احتلال ومطالبة بالحق المسلوب في تقرير المصير، وعلى مر العقود كان خيار السلام مطروحاً، ولكنه كان ضحية المماطلة والتسويف. وعلينا أن نسأل من هو الطرف الذي واجه كل مبادرات السلام بوضع العراقيل أمامها والتصعيد لإفشالها. إذا كنا مخلصين حقاً في العمل معاً نحو مستقبل مشترك، فالبداية هي الاعتراف الموجع بحقيقة الخلل في النظام العالمي. هذا الخلل الذي يسمح بالقبول باستدامة الصراع وعدم الوصول إلى حل، ولا يمكن لهذا الحل أن يكون مستداماً إلا إذا كان عادلاً وشاملاً. كما يجب تكثيف الجهود المخلصة في وضع تصورات جديدة للنظام الدولي تتناسب مع ظروف العالم اليوم، وأن نتخلى عن حسابات الماضي التي خرجت من حيز واقعنا، وأن نبدأ اليوم في بناء المستقبل بمراجعة شاملة لنظامنا الدولي والإنساني، مراجعة تؤسس لنظام عالمي يقوم على أنظمة وقواعد ومؤسسات تحترم المساواة بين الشعوب، لا امتيازات فيها للقوة ولا تمييز أو تفضيل فيها على أساس العرق أو الدين أو الانتماء السياسي. وقد يقول قائل بأن هذا الوقت ليس مناسباً للحديث عن مستقبل مشترك للعالم أجمع في ظل التباين الشاسع في المواقف تجاه قضية تختبر إنسانيتنا جميعا، ولكننا نرى بأننا أحوج ما نكون اليوم إلى أن يسمع بعضنا البعض، وأن يفهم كل منا الآخر، وأن نناقش بصراحة لا مجاملة فيها، وبأمل يتجاوز مآسي الحاضر كيف نعود بالعالم إلى الرؤى التي شكلت النظام الدولي. فقد علمنا التاريخ أن الحوار هو الطريق الأمثل لمواجهة أعقد الصراعات إذا توفرت الإرادة الخيرة والقيادة السياسية الحكيمة. وهذا هو منطلق إيمان دولة قطر بأهمية الوساطة في حل النزاعات وبذلها لكافة الجهود في سبيل تحقيق ذلك، بما في ذلك الجهود المستمرة مع شركائنا في المنطقة والمجتمع الدولي لوقف إطلاق النار في غزة. إن هذا الحضور متنوع في هذه القاعة وخلال اليومين القادمين يمثل فرصة لنقاشات متعمقة تأخذ في الحسبان كل تعقيدات الحاضر وتبحث في ثنايا الصورة القاتمة لواقعنا اليوم عن بصيص أمل لمستقبل يكون عنوانه السلام والازدهار والتعاون. ولذا أدعوكم إلى استغلال جلسات هذه المنتدى ولقاءاته للوصول إلى أفكار ورؤات تعين صناع القرار في التعامل مع التحديات التي نواجهها وتعكس الرغبة الحقيقية في بناء مستقبل مشترك. الحضور الكرام، على الرغم من الآلام المتراكمة التي خلفتها الصراعات والنزاعات في عالمنا اليوم، علينا التمسك بالأمل في غد مشرق وبناء مستقبل مشترك. ونحن جميعا في هذه اللحظة الفارقة أمام تحد لإثبات إنسانيتنا ولإبقاء جذوة الأمل لدى شعوبنا حية بقدرة البشرية على مواجهة الحرب بالسلام والصراع بالحوار والدمار بالبناء. أتمنى لكم التوفيق، والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
Thank you very much indeed, Your Excellency, for setting the tone for this 21st edition of the Doha Forum, for reminding us of the widening gap in the world today, the forces of polarization, of fragmentation, and the urgency with which we all need to act to find a constructive way forward. Now, one of the key institutions that comes to mind when we think of how to address the world's crises is the United Nations, an institution that was created in 1945 on the ashes of World War II. But too often, we are failing. It was Ukraine last year, it is Palestine today, with the caveat that the tragedy of Palestine is as old as the United Nations itself. In fact, some might argue that the tragedy of Palestine is the tragedy of the United Nations. And unless we change our fundamental approach to avert future wars, there will always be another war in the waiting. And before we also do our utmost to bring those responsible for war crimes to justice and accountability, there will always be another war. Too often, we see a war approaching like a gathering storm, but we choose to wait, and often wait far too long. How do we avert these future wars if we refuse to hold all nations, the weak and the powerful alike, to the same standards of international justice, just as His Highness just mentioned? How do we protect the rights of vulnerable communities if the United Nations itself fails to speak up for them, if it fails to speak truth to power? Nearly 8 decades after its creation, the UN is still controlled by the same 5 countries that have decided the fate of the remaining 188. Is it time for a new global order, a new global institution with new rules? Can we truly build shared futures if the one organization meant to represent each and every one of us remains stuck in the power structures of the past? It is a moment of truth, but we've heard that many times before. Can the UN live up to its principle of, quote, the sovereign equality of all its members, which is enshrined in its charter? Can it restore our loss of faith? Just last week, the United Nations Secretary General invoked Article 99 of that charter, something he hasn't done since his tenure began in 2017. He asked for a humanitarian ceasefire in Gaza because humanitarian assistance to Gaza is about to collapse. But is that enough? Please welcome to the stage the Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres.
Your Highness Sheikh Tamim bin Ahmad Al Thani, thank you very much for convening the Doha Forum. Your team, building shared futures, could not be more timely. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, recent events, from the COVID-19 pandemic to the climate crisis and the digital revolution, have shown a spotlight on one fact: we are deeply interconnected. No man is an island, as the poet wrote. Today, to be gender sensitive, I would say no one is an island. And indeed today, no island is an island. Melting ice in Antarctica causes floods and droughts across Africa. Hunger in Haiti is inflamed by bombs in the Black Sea. Humanity shares one destiny and one planet. And today the planet is being hit by a perfect storm. Geopolitical divides, global inequalities, raging conflicts, rising poverty and hunger, climate chaos, crashing debt and skyrocketing prices, new technology without governance or guardrails. So, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, our world is in a difficult moment of transition. For decades, despite terrible conflicts, geopolitical relations were relatively stable, based on alliances around the two Cold War superpowers. Today, after a short period of unipolarity, we are moving towards a multipolar world. This brings new opportunities for leadership, justice, and balance in global relations. But it also creates complexity. And we need strong multilateral institutions to manage that complexity in order to avoid chaos. But today, those institutions are weak and outdated. They are caught in a time warp, reflecting the reality of 80 years ago. Social, economic, and political relations have changed dramatically since then. We need a serious effort to bring global structures up to date, rooted in equality and solidarity, and based on the United Nations Charter and international law. Take the Security Council. The preeminent forum for the peaceful resolution of international disputes is paralyzed by geostrategic divisions. The fact is undermining solutions from Ukraine to Myanmar to the Middle East. The horrific attacks by Hamas on 7 October, followed by the relentless Israeli bombardment of Gaza, were met by a resounding silence from the Council. After more than 1 month, the Council finally passed a resolution which I welcome, but that delay comes at a cost. The Council's authority and credibility were severely undermined. And the resolution is not being implemented. Last week, I delivered a letter to the President of the Security Council invoking Article 99 of the Charter of the United Nations for the first time since I became Secretary General in 2017. I wrote that there is no effective protection of civilians in Gaza. As a matter of fact, during my mandate, the number of civilian casualties in Gaza in such a short period is totally unprecedented. The healthcare system is collapsing. Expect public order to completely break down soon. And an even worse situation could unfold, including epidemic diseases and increased pressure for mass displacement into Egypt. I said that we are facing a severe risk of collapse of the humanitarian system. The situation is fast deteriorating into a catastrophe with potentially irreversible implications for Palestinians as a whole and for peace and security in the region. And I urge the Security Council to press to avert the humanitarian catastrophe, and I reiterated my appeal for a humanitarian ceasefire to be declared. Regrettably, the Security Council failed to do it, but that does not make it less necessary. So, I can promise I will not give up. I thank His Highness and the government of Qatar for their mediation role, particularly in the agreement on a humanitarian pause, increased humanitarian assistance, and the release of hostages. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, beyond the Security Council, global governance is failing to manage two existential threats. First, climate. We need far more ambition to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and ensure climate justice. Despite promises and pledges, our climate is in breakdown. Emissions are at an all-time high, and fossil fuels remain their major cause. Renewable energy is cheap, clean, and infinite. It can meet the world's growing energy demand without poisoning our environment and suffocating our planet. I urge fossil fuel companies to use their enormous resources to lead the renewables revolution. And I urge leaders at COP28 in Dubai to agree on deep cuts to emissions in line with 1.5 degree. That is the only road not only to climate sustainability, but economic sustainability. The proposal I made of a climate solidarity pact calls on big emitters to make extra efforts to cut emissions and wealthier countries to support emerging economies to do so. And we also need deep reforms to our global financial architecture. We must have more ambition on reduction of emissions, but also more ambition on climate justice, because developing countries that are not contributing to the climate change are the ones that are paying the heaviest price. For those financial changes to take place, the Bretton Woods system must be made truly universal and truly representative of today's economic reality, and not of the economic reality of the post-Second World War. And multilateral development banks must change their business model and leverage far more private finance at reasonable cost for developing countries to invest in climate action and the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, second, we must face up to the threat posed by new technologies. Artificial intelligence could provide solutions to many global challenges, but without adequate regulation, it will also lead into deep and troubled waters. AI is already supercharging hate speech and division, enabling data harvesting and mass surveillance, and exacerbating vast inequalities. To help advance the search for solutions, I've appointed a multi-stakeholder high-level advisory board here on AI, which will provide preliminary recommendations by the end of this year. These technologies cry out for governance. And I believe that governance should be networked and inclusive, flexible and agile, and that the UN should be at the center of the network as the only organization that combines legitimacy, universality, and diversity. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, this month marks the 75th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. But we are not living up to the promise of this landmark document. Reforms to global governance must be grounded in the Universal Declaration and the enduring values of the UN Charter. Next September, Summit of the Future, is a once-in-a-generation opportunity for these important decisions, to look seriously into the reform of our global multilateral governance system. We have put forward a series of proposals to member states, and I look forward to their engagement and support. A global digital compact would mitigate the risks of digital technologies and help to harness their benefits for the good of humanity. Reforms of the global financial architecture would enable governments in developing countries to be able to invest in education, health, jobs, and social protection for their people, instead of being drowned in debt and without fiscal space to act. And the reforms to the Security Council and the proposed new agenda for peace would help to prevent and resolve conflict, deliver equity and justice, have no double standards, rebalance geopolitical relations, and give developing countries a greater voice on the international stage. As the forces of fragmentation gain ground, we must build bridges and find shared solutions to global challenges. We need the solidarity that is evident here at the Doha Forum to advance these ambitious agendas. Now is truly the time for building shared futures, uniting behind solutions and transforming our world for good. Shukran.
Shukran, many thanks, Secretary General Guterres, for being here and for sounding the alarm on behalf of all those who still believe in the founding principles of the United Nations. Now, the Doha Forum has, over the last 3 years, built a tradition of recognizing and honoring the work of individuals and organizations around the world. This year's award goes to an institution that has been struggling to bring much-needed relief and aid to an entire population trying to survive under a suffocating siege and constant bombardment. Its own staff members and aid workers have come under sustained attack over the last 2 months. Over 130 of them are confirmed to have been killed. It is the largest number of United Nations aid workers killed in such a short span of time. They, like the rest of the population, had been trapped with nowhere to go as they tried to do the honorable job, which is help those less fortunate. This year's Doha Forum Award goes to the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine in the Near East, UNRWA. It is a tribute to those whose lives have been cut short and to all the brave colleagues who continue their work and carry on their legacy. Established in 1948, there were 750,000 refugees at the time in Palestine. Today, there are around 6 million in occupied Palestine as well as in neighboring countries. And let me just add that UNRWA was established for all refugees in historic Palestine, which included Jewish refugees at the time. It is the third annual award of the Doha Forum, and this year it couldn't have gone to a more worthy recipient. It also includes a 1 million rial donation for UNRWA. And now to present the 2023 Doha Forum Award, it is my distinct pleasure and honor to call on His Highness, Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani, Emir of the State of Qatar. And here to accept the award from the Emir on behalf of the UN Agency for Palestine Refugees and its 30,000 staff members, 90% of whom are refugees themselves, is UNRWA's Commissioner General, Philip Lazzarini. Thank you, Your Highness. Our heartfelt congratulations to UNRWA for this richly deserved recognition. Thanking the Emir of the State of Qatar once again, and our heartfelt congratulations to UNRWA. May I ask you to remain on the stage, Commissioner General Lazzarini. And if I could invite you to take a seat right here on the stage as you are joined by Stephanie Decker, Al Jazeera's senior foreign correspondent, who has reported extensively from Palestine and the entire region for over a decade now. She will be conducting an interview, but first, let us remind ourselves of just how vital and critical the work of UNRWA is for refugees in the Gaza Strip, in the West Bank, in East Jerusalem, and across the refugee camps in the Middle East.
Philip Lazzarini, we thank you for being here in person to receive the award on behalf of UNRWA, on behalf of the incredibly brave staff who are working tirelessly under impossible conditions. I want to pick up on something that the film actually said, that Palestinians deserve not just aid, they deserve a political solution. I've been going in and out of Gaza for 15 years. And it seems that the cycle of conflict has always had a temporary plaster applied to the Palestinian suffering. You've come out of Gaza, you've been in twice since October the 7th. You wrote that what you witnessed was some of the saddest of your career. And you've had an extensive career covering conflict and post-conflict. Is this the worst that you've seen?
By any description, it's definitely the worst situation I have ever seen. And by any account, if you look at, as the Secretary General said, the number of people who have been killed in only 2 months, if you look at the massive displacement, 90% of the population has been moved, in which context do we see this? It's also a context in which the UN is pushed to its limit. We have more than 1 million people living in overcrowded shelter under the UN flag. People are coming to seek protection, and even the protection of the blue flag is not anymore in protection in Gaza. So by any account, the situation is of a catastrophic nature in the region.
Actually, I wanted to pick up on that. You've had 134 staff in the last 24 hours. I understand that's been updated by one more death of your staff. Our condolences. 134 UNRWA staff killed. Over 120 UNRWA facilities targeted by Israel, despite the fact that the United Nations gives the coordinates of your facilities to Israel. We've had the UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, sound the alarm on the world that this is something that needs to be stopped. We've had discussions in the UN Security Council, the United States using its veto, deeming that a ceasefire is not necessary. The tools that we have been given through the United Nations to stop the suffering, and you recently also quoted, I think you said, to prevent the descent into hell. How does this make you feel, that somehow it's failing?
You heard the Secretary General. We are not giving up. We will continue to seek for a ceasefire. There is no doubt that a humanitarian ceasefire is needed if we want to put an end to hell on earth right now in Gaza.
I think it's also very important to ask about the next day. I've been talking to our colleagues in Gaza. One of my colleagues was saying, I don't know the state of my home in Gaza City. I have no idea. And he is one voice out of hundreds of thousands. And he said to me, Stephanie, of course we want a ceasefire, but when that comes, hell is not over. He said the amount of destruction that is in Gaza, you don't even get a sense through the television. He said it is inexplicable. They have families. They have 5, 6, 7, 8 children. They have big families in Gaza. How are you, because you are the representative and the agency that is going to have to be at the forefront of trying to help over 2 million people. Can you prepare? How are you preparing?
I think the day after will depend on how we respond to the current situation. No one really knows how it will evolve. When I went to Gaza 2 weeks ago, I visited one of the overcrowded shelters. I was completely struck by the misery and the distress of the people, but also their living condition, the feeling that they have been stripped from their dignity. I met a man who burst into tears, telling me that they are living in 4 square meters with their 5 children, sleeping on the floor, no mattress, no blanket, using their shoes as a pillow, struggling to get everyday water, and basically say, I feel humiliated, we feel psychologically broke. And this is the kind of condition our staff are also sharing. And this is also one of the reasons why I addressed the President of the General Assembly, telling him that we as UNRWA, we are on the edge of collapse, and if we collapse, it's the entire humanitarian platform which might collapse in Gaza. And would this be the case, it would also be felt as an ultimate betrayal from felt by the Palestinians from the international community, they would feel completely abandoned, and that would also have a political repercussion and would have a repercussion on the so-called day after. Now, when we talk about the staff, and here I'm very grateful of the award of the Doha Forum that we have received today, and it's a tribute to our staff, it's a tribute to our fallen colleagues also, and to their families. But they share exactly the same day-to-day life than the people we are trying to help. Our staff today, they come to work with their children because they don't know if they will see their children at the end of the day, or they say, if we have to die, we prefer to die together. I asked a staff 2 weeks ago, how do you do to operate? You look so composed, and we are still asking people to do the impossible in an impossible situation. And he said, I am not. I'm just looking at a corner in the building and go to cry 10 times a day. People are psychologically broke today. And I have also to say, we keep talking about asking the people to go back to their places of origin. But where to go back? Everything has been destroyed. And most of the people I am meeting there, they say, I don't see my future anymore in Gaza. I have enough. My children have known only war, only conflict. If you are 20 years old in Gaza, you have known 5 or 6 cycles of violence in addition of the blockade. But this one, by any account, has been the most devastating one.
It is unprecedented, and I don't think anybody knows what's going to happen next. You touched there. Do you think the world is guilty of a dehumanization of the Palestinians? I know in my reporting at some point, I felt like I had to highlight Abu Ayman, who is Gaza's best-known lifeguard, and parents who bring their children to learn to swim. We did a story on the beautiful strawberry farms of Beit Lahia in the north, and they are the sweetest strawberries I have ever tasted. And people, we had such a response because people didn't understand this view of Gaza, that you had people with hopes and dreams, children who wanted to be doctors, who wanted to travel. Do you feel like we have failed the Palestinians and that the world has become used to the fact that simply 5 are killed in the occupied West Bank a day, tomorrow it's 2, then it's 10, then Gaza, it's the usual? Are we guilty? Are we all collectively guilty of this?
We definitely have failed the Palestinians so far. And the dehumanization dimension is a worrying trend because this has made the unbearable bearable for the international community, has made the unbearable we see continuously on the news bearable again. Now, talking about dehumanization, and I saw the first video. The first video was talking about empathy. The problem is that the empathy in the region is still selective. It's either an empathy with Israeli or an empathy with the Palestinian, but there is no joint and mutual empathy. And I have seen this over the last 30 years, how this dehumanization process has taken shape. When I went to Gaza at the beginning of the 90s, it was the first intifada. At that time, in every household, there was a member of the family speaking Hebrew, and vice versa. The Israeli was speaking in Arabic, and they knew each other despite the violence of the first intifada. You go back 30 years later, there is absolutely no young Palestinian below the age of 20 or 30 who knows how an Israeli look like, or an Israeli how a Palestinian look like. We have completely separated the two people, and hence also this lack of mutual understanding, mutual empathy. And if you do not know your neighbors, this will also have an impact in the future when we talk about promoting peace and security and cohabitation between the people.
I think in the opening film of the forum it said that the cries of their children should be heard as our own. Very quickly, we're running out of time. I want to ask you, we're sitting in a room with leaders of very powerful countries, of representatives of very powerful countries that have the ability, through political pressure, through many means, to try and start the dialogue again of coming to some kind of a political solution. What is your message to them?
We have to put an end to this madness, to this darkness. On Friday, the Security Council failed to agree on the ceasefire. We heard from the Secretary General, we will not give up. Meanwhile, what we need is scaling up a meaningful humanitarian assistance, an environment allowing us to reach the people. But as we heard also this morning, we need one international humanitarian law to be respected the same way by all the parties. It cannot just be interpreted the way we want.
Commissioner General Philip Lazzarini, thank you so much.
Thank you.